loveliest listener of the ton. On the morning London decided to forget she existed, Maren Ellis stood outside the locked door of the east wing of Ashmore House and prepared to do something she could not take back. She had already decided not to keep her head down, not to be grateful and invisible and safe, to find out what they were hiding. Ashmore House stood in the heart of Mayfair like a cathedral built to wealth rather than God. 7 stories of pale stone, 43 rooms, a marble staircase imported from Florence that no servant was permitted to touch with a bare hand. Gas lamps burning in every corridor, even in daylight, because darkness itself was not welcome here without an invitation. Maren had worked there 11 months. She knew the house the way a prisoner knows a cell, intimately, grudgingly, with a kind of dark tenderness born of having no other choice. She knew that the east corridor smelled of damp after rain, that the 3rd stair from the top of the back staircase creaked like a confession, that the library lock stuck if you turned it too fast, and that Mrs. Finch, who managed Ashmore House the way a jailer manages a prison, had eyes that missed nothing and a memory that forgave even less. Maren was 23, dark-haired, slight, with the kind of stillness that came not from peace but from practice, years of learning to take up less space, make less noise, want less openly. Her hands were rough from cold water and stone floors. Her mind was not. She had a face that looked at a glance like pleasant blankness, the kind of face you looked at and immediately forgot because you were not in the habit of looking at maids. But her eyes, pale gray, watchful, faintly, privately amused, those were the eyes of a woman who had already decided something about you before you had opened your mouth. The key to the east wing had been pressed into her palm that morning by Mrs. Finch, who did not look at her when she did it. Thorough, Mrs. Finch said. Quick and quiet. Yes, Mrs. Finch, Maren replied. What she was really thinking was, 6 weeks. 6 weeks this corridor has been locked. Thomas Reeve worked it the night before he vanished, and now suddenly they needed cleaned in a hurry, without explanation, without fuss. Someone is coming, and someone is very afraid of what the rooms remember. She turned the key, she pushed open the door, the cold hit her first, and then she began. The east wing had been stripped, not emptied, that would have been obvious, that would have required explanation, stripped carefully, methodically, of anything that might answer a question. The furniture remained, the curtains hung undisturbed, but the shelves were bare, the fireplace ash was too fresh for a room supposedly untouched, and in 3 places along the far wall the plaster was new. Paler than the stone around it, not yet fully dry. Maren pressed 2 fingers against the nearest patch and felt it give just slightly beneath her touch. She thought about Thomas Reeve. He had been a footman here, 20 years old, quiet, kind, with ink-stained fingers from the letters he wrote his mother every Sunday without fail. 6 weeks ago he had been here, then he was gone, room emptied before the other servants woke, no reference given, no farewell said, as though he had never existed at all. Maren had liked him, and she had found the letter. Not by searching, she would have you know that. She had been laying a fire in the Duke's study 3 weeks ago in the gray 6 o'clock morning when she noticed the envelope beneath the edge of the desk blotter, pushed there hastily, the corner just visible. The name had stopped her cold. Thomas Reeve. She should not have touched it. She knew, even as her fingers closed around the paper, that knowing things was a dangerous business when you were a housemaid in someone else's world, that information was not power for women like her. It was simply weight. She read it anyway. Because Maren Ellis had never once in her life been able to leave a truth alone, and she was not about to begin now. The letter was short, 3 paragraphs, but each one landed like a stone dropped into still water, the ripple spreading farther than you expected, touching things you had not known were close. Thomas Reeve had not been dismissed. He had been bought. Handsomely, permanently bought, in exchange for his silence about what he had witnessed in the east wing of Ashmore House on the 14th of October. The letter did not say what he had witnessed, but the final line said this: "If you speak, the arrangements we have made for your mother's care will be reconsidered. If you stay silent, they will continue. The choice, as always, is yours." Maren stood in that study for a very long time. Then she folded the letter with hands she forced to remain steady, replaced it precisely where she had found it, finished the fire, picked up her bucket and brushes, walked out, and told herself all the way down the back stairs several calm and reasonable lies. It is not your concern. You do not know what happened here. You cannot afford to know. All true. All insufficient. Because Thomas Reeve was out there somewhere, staying silent to protect his mother, and whatever he had seen was still locked behind these walls. And Maren, to her considerable inconvenience, had a conscience. She was on her knees at the skirting board, brush moving along the baseboard, when the brush caught the edge of something. She stopped, pressed. A hollow sound, not the dull thud-thud of Thor, but the resonant echo of empty space beneath. A loose floorboard. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she lifted it. Inside, a tin box, small, unassuming, the kind of thing that held nothing of consequence, except that inside the tin box were letters. Maren sat on the cold floor of the east wing and read every single one. The previous Duke of Ashmore, Edmund's father, dead 3 years, and London called it a tragedy, had secretly owned a factory in the Midlands, not openly, never openly, through a chain of holding companies designed to be untraceable, built specifically to put distance between the Ashworth name and the smoke and the stone. 7 years. 7 years of falsified safety records, bribed inspectors, and workers who raised complaints quietly disappearing from the payroll. Then, 4 years ago, a floor collapsed. 3 men died. An inquiry was opened and then quietly, expensively, shamefully shelved. 3 families were paid to vanish. Records were destroyed. The letters named every man who had helped, every sum exchanged, every favor purchased. The previous Duke had been thorough. Not thorough enough. Someone had saved these letters, hidden them here, beneath the floor of this stripped and silent room, waiting for the day they would matter. And now, Maren Ellis, housemaid, was sitting on top of them. She heard his footsteps in the corridor. She recognized them. She despised that she recognized them, that her stupid, traitorous heart had catalogued the particular cadence of this man's walk in the week since he had started appearing in the East Wing, that her pulse had learned to quicken 2 seconds before the door opened. There was nowhere to put the letters, no time. Edmund Ashworth opened the door. He looked at her on the floor, at the tin box, at the letter spread across her lap. The silence lasted a very long time. When he spoke, his voice was careful, emptied from everything. "Where did you find those?" Not a question, an observation. "Under the floorboard, Your Grace." She kept her voice even, she kept her face still, but she looked at him, directly, steadily, the way she looked at no one else in this house, because she needed to see his face, needed to know what she was dealing with. What she saw was not guilt. What she saw was grief, old, private, held alone for a very long time. He crossed the room, and then, and this is the thing she would return to later, in the small hours of cold mornings, he sat on the floor. Not in a chair, there were none. He sat on the floor across from her, back against the bare wall, elbows on his knees, head bowed. The Duke of Ashmore, in the dust, looking like a man who had finally run out of places to stand. "You've read them," he said. "Yes. All of them. Enough." He lifted his head. His face was bleak in the winter light from the window, stripped of the composure she had come to expect, stripped of everything that rank and habit had laid over the top of him. "How much do you understand?" he asked. Maren looked at the letters in her lap. "3 men died," she said quietly, "in a factory your family owned secretly through companies built to protect the name. The inquiry was buried. The families were silenced. Thomas Reeves saw something he was not supposed to see and was paid to forget it." She met his eyes. "And you have known. For how long?" Edmund's jaw tightened. "Since I returned from the continent 8 months ago. My solicitor had already. My father had left standing instructions. The arrangements were made before I knew they existed." "And you allowed them to stand," Maren said. A long silence. "Yes," he said, "I did." The word fell between them like a verdict. "Why?" she asked. Edmund looked at the letters. "Because I did not know how to undo it without destroying everything else. The factory still operates. 400 workers depend on it, the families of this estate, tenants, staff. If the Ashworth name collapses, they collapse with it." He stopped. His throat worked. "I told myself I would find another way, reparations made quietly, truth told in pieces. I told myself the silence was temporary." "You told yourself," Maren said, "that if you were still enough, the past would stay buried." He looked at her. "Yes," he said, quietly, ashamed. Maren looked down at the letters. 3 men. She thought about them the way she thought about Thomas Reeve, not as incidents, not as liabilities, not the incident, but as people, with mothers, with Sunday habits, with names that deserved to be spoken in rooms that would not say them. "What are you going to do?" Edmund asked. His voice was level, but beneath it was something rawer than a threat, something that was the opposite of a threat, something exposed. "With what you know," he said, "you could take those letters, go to a journalist, end the Ashworth name entirely, end me." Maren regarded him for a long moment. "Is that what you're afraid of?" she asked. "I'm afraid of many things," he said. "At the moment, I'm afraid of you." She should not have felt what she felt at that. She felt it anyway. "I'm a housemaid," she said. "You're the most dangerous person in this room," he replied, without irony, without qualification. Maren looked at the letters in her hands and thought about what silence cost and what it cost the people who were not powerful enough to choose it for themselves. "Tell the truth," she said. Edmund's eyes sharpened. "It will destroy your father's name," she said. "Not yours, not yet, not if you tell it yourself, before someone takes it from you and uses it as a weapon." He was very still. "The 3 families deserve to know," she continued. "Thomas Reeve deserves his silence released. And you," she met his eyes and she did not look away, "you deserve to stop carrying a secret that was never yours to carry in the first place." Edmund stared at her. A housemaid on a cold floor telling him how to be a better man. And the terrible thing, the wonderful, wretched thing, was that she was right, and he knew it, and she knew that he knew it, and they were both sitting in the knowledge of it on a dusty floor in an empty room with 3 men's letters between them. "You make it sound simple," he said. "I know it isn't," Maren replied. "I know what it costs to speak truth in rooms that would prefer silence. I've done it. It cost me a position once, left me with nothing but the clothes I was wearing and the city of London, which is not, I assure you, as hospitable as it appears." She paused. "It will cost you considerably more than that." "And you think I should do it anyway?" "I think," she said, "that you already know you should. I think that's why you're still sitting on the floor with me instead of calling for Mrs. Finch and having me dismissed." Edmund looked at her for a long moment. Then, quietly, he laughed. Not with joy, not the laugh of a man who found things funny, the laugh of a man who had been seen, entirely, honestly, without flattery or performance, for perhaps the first time in years. "Ellis," he said. "Yes, Your Grace. What on earth am I going to do with you?" Maren began folding the letters back into the tin box with careful, deliberate hands. "Nothing, Your Grace. I'm going to do something with myself, as I generally do." He came back to the East Wing the next day, and the day after that. She told herself the first time was coincidence, the second time oversight. By the third morning, standing in the corridor with her brush in hand and his footsteps coming down the passage toward her at the hour they always came now, she had run out of comfortable stories and was simply left with the truth. The Duke of Ashmore was finding reasons to be where she was, and Maren, who was not naive and had not been naive since approximately the age of 9, understood what that meant, understood it, cataloged it, and then put it away in a locked room inside herself and told it firmly not to make any noise. He was a duke. She was a housemaid. The distance between those two facts was not a gap, it was a chasm. It was the whole architecture of the world they lived in, every social rule and written law and unwritten expectation, a structure built specifically, deliberately, to keep people like her in their proper place. She told herself this every morning at 4:30. She told herself this every time she heard his footsteps in the East Wing corridor and felt something in her chest do something inconvenient. It became something of a mantra. It did not help, because he talked to her, not about the household, not about the letters, not about the factory that made them sit together on a cold floor and speak the truth in the dark. He talked to her the way people did not talk to maids, as though she had a mind that was worth addressing, as though her opinions were things he was genuinely curious about rather than tolerating. He asked what she was reading, she told him. He asked what she thought, she told him that too, and she did not soften it, and he did not seem to want her to. He disagreed with her sometimes, good-naturedly, precisely, as though the disagreement itself was something he enjoyed. She disagreed back. He listened. Once, just once, on a question about factory reform, of all the uncomfortable ironies, she watched him change his mind in real time, his expression shifting from resistance to consideration to a kind of reluctant concession that he wore the way a man wears something new that fits better than expected. "You're insufferable," he told her once. "I know," she said. "Mrs. Finch has said the same, though with somewhat less affection." He looked away quickly, but not before she saw it. The almost smile. She looked away too. London watched, of course. London always watched. The other servants noticed. How could they not? A duke who walked the East Wing corridors before breakfast. A housemaid who looked at him when she spoke instead of her own feet. Mrs. Finch noticed most of all, and her noticing had the texture of a threat that had not yet found its form. Maren felt the watching. She was used to being watched. She simply made herself unreadable, the way she had always. Still face, still hands, pulse screaming quietly beneath her skin where no one could see it. The almost moment came on a Tuesday evening in November. The house was occupied with a dinner party, 30 guests, 3 courses, the full terrible machinery of a society evening grinding through its motions below stairs. Maren was not required to serve. She had spent the evening in her attic room reading by candlelight, which was her greatest luxury and her only privacy, until she realized that the book she was reading was not hers. One of his. She had borrowed it 10 days ago without asking, because by then the rules between them had quietly rearranged themselves into something that made asking feel unnecessary and also, she suspected, slightly absurd. She should return it. The study was empty at this hour. He was supposed to be at dinner. He was not at dinner. He was standing at the window in his shirt sleeves, coat discarded over the back of the chair, looking out at the winter dark of Mayfair with an expression of a man who had removed himself from the company of 30 people and was not even slightly sorry about it. He turned when she entered. Maren held up the book. "I'm returning this," she said. "I didn't expect you to be here. I'll go." "Did you enjoy it?" he asked.
She stopped. The first half was brilliant. The second half made me want to argue with the author directly, which is unfortunately not possible, given that he died in 1841. Something moved in his expression. What would you argue? She told him. He disagreed, firmly, clearly, with the particular energy he brought to disagreements with her that he never seemed to bring to anything else. "You are insufferable," he told her once. "I know," she said. The cutting quiet inside her was poised to illuminate their sense. The book she had come to return was lying forgotten on the desk between them, and at some point, she could not have said exactly when, the argument had become something else. They were standing very close, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, close enough to hear the slight unevenness in his breathing that had not been there at the start of the evening. She stopped speaking mid-sentence. He did not look away. The lamplight sat between them, warm and still, and the dark pressed against the windows, and 30 people were somewhere below them, laughing too loudly at things that were not that funny, and none of it was real in the way this moment was real. "Maren," he said, "not Ellis, not Miss Ellis."
Just her name, quiet, unguarded, stripped of every layer of form and propriety until it was simply her. She stepped back. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice was steady. She was distantly grateful for this. "I should go." He did not reach for her. He did not move at all. "Yes," he said, "you probably should." She set the book on the desk and she left. She walked down the corridor and through the door and onto the back staircase, and she stood on the 3rd step, the one that creaked like a confession, and pressed her back against the cold stone wall and stayed there, very still, for a very long time. "This is the shape of impossible things," she told herself. "You have always known this shape. You have known it since the beginning. Leave it alone." She went to bed. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and listened to the distant noise of the dinner party below, and she did not sleep until well past midnight. And even then, she dreamed of lamplight. It was Mrs. Finch who ended it. Of course it was Mrs. Finch. Maren had been expecting it, had felt the ending gathering the way you feel a storm before it arrives, that particular thickening of the air. She had not known what form it would take. She had simply known it was coming. It came on a Wednesday morning in December, 6 days after the study, when Mrs. Finch called her into the small, cold office behind the kitchen and informed her, with the particular pleasure of a woman who has been waiting some time to deliver a verdict, that her services at Ashmore House were no longer required. "You have been," Mrs. Finch said, folding her hands on the desk, "inappropriate in your conduct, in your manner, in your attitude." Maren stood with her hands folded in front of her and her face arranged into the pleasant blankness she had perfected over 23 years. "In what specific way, Mrs. Finch?" she asked. "You know in what way. I would like it stated clearly." Mrs. Finch's eyes went cold as marble. "You have forgotten your place. You have made yourself conspicuous. You will collect your things and be gone by noon. There will be no reference." No reference? Without a reference, she was nothing. Without a reference, the next position would be harder, and the one after that harder still, and the city would grind her down to whatever was left when the options ran out. Maren looked at the woman across the desk. She thought about 11 months of 4:30 mornings, cold water, stone floors, making herself small and quiet and unnoticed in every room of this house. She thought about Thomas Reeve, writing letters to his mother with ink-stained fingers. She thought about 3 men who had been called the incident. "Who asked you to dismiss me, Mrs. Finch?" she said quietly. "I beg your pardon? It was not the Duke, was it?" Not a question, an observation. "Because the Duke would have told me himself." A flicker, barely perceptible, but Maren had been reading faces for years in rooms full of people who thought themselves unreadable. "You will leave," Mrs. Finch said very quietly, "by noon." Maren left.
She packed her things in the attic room with the efficiency of someone who had packed before, who had always known, in the place where she kept her honest accounting of things, that rooms like this were temporary, that belonging was something you carried inside yourself because no one would ever let you set it down anywhere permanent. One carpet bag, the books she had bought herself, the pearl earrings that had been her mother's. Everything else had always been Ashmore's. She was halfway down the back staircase when his voice came from the landing above. "Ellis." She stopped. He was at the top of the stair, in his morning coat. He had come from the upper floors at a pace that was not quite dignified. His expression was not quite composed, and Maren felt something painful happen very quickly in the center of her chest. "Who told you to leave?" he asked. "Mrs. Finch." "I did not authorize." "I know." He came down 2 steps. They were nearly level. She thought, with one part of her mind, that this was probably deliberate. "I'll have it reversed, immediately." "No," she said. He blinked. "I beg your—" "Don't." The word came out very steady. She was grateful for that. "If you call me back now under these circumstances, you will make my position in this house impossible. Every servant will know. It will not help me. It will only satisfy you." Edmund's jaw worked. "Then what?" "Tell the truth. What we talked about. Tell it properly, publicly, before someone takes it from you and weaponizes it. Thomas Reeves' silence, the 3 families, all of it." He stared at her from 2 steps above. And she looked up at him, this man who had sat on a dusty floor and laughed a real laugh and said her name as though it mattered, and she felt the ache of it move through her like a cold draft through a stone building, finding all the gaps she had not sealed properly. "Maren," he said quietly, "where will you go?" She lifted the carpet bag. "I'll manage," she said. "I generally do." She walked out of Ashmore House into the gray December morning. She did not look back. She had learned very young that looking back was how you got turned to salt. She found a room in Bloomsbury on a street that smelled of coal smoke and bread from the bakery on the corner. She found work within a fortnight, not easily without a reference, but Maren had learned to present herself with a directness that served in lieu of one. A small progressive women's publication on Holborn, understaffed and underfunded, and staffed almost entirely with women who had opinions and nowhere to put them. They paid very little. They asked her opinion constantly. She found this, on balance, an acceptable trade. She did not hear from Edmund Ashworth. She had not expected to. She told herself this firmly, clearly, in the same tone she used for the other important lies, the ones that were true enough to live with. She thought about him at inconvenient hours, early mornings when the light was gray and the city was still quiet, and there was nothing to occupy her mind before it had properly woken. The lamplight, the floor of the east wing, the almost smile, his voice saying her name just once without the weight of who they were. She allowed the thoughts, then she did the next thing, because there was no useful alternative. London talked about the Ashworths, as London always talked about everything, in drawing rooms and clubs and the columns of newspapers, in the particular breathless way of a city that fed on other people's difficulties. A factory scandal somewhere in the Midlands, an inquiry into the late Duke's business practices, rumors of documents, of families compensated, of records that were not as thoroughly destroyed as someone had hoped. 6 weeks after she left Ashmore House, the story broke. Not in rumors, not in fragments and whispers and the careful language of implication. In full. A voluntary statement given by Edmund Ashworth, Duke of Ashmore, released simultaneously to 3 newspapers. A complete accounting of the factory, the collapse, the deaths, the cover-up, the payments, the names of the men who had made it disappear, reparations to the 3 families, proper reparations, framed not as charity but as an acknowledgement of a debt that could never be fully paid. And Thomas Reeve publicly released from any agreement made on his behalf with back wages and a written apology. The Ton was thunderstruck. London divided, as London always divided, between those who called him noble and those who called him a fool, with the largest contingent being those who could not decide, and so settled on calling them both, depending on the company. Maren read the statement at her desk in the offices of the publication, standing at the window because she had arisen automatically from her chair when she saw the headline, the December sun cold on her face and her hands not quite steady on the page. She thought, good. She thought, you did it. She thought very quietly, so quietly it was almost not a thought at all. I miss you. She folded the paper, she sat back down, she returned to the article she was editing. She did not permit herself anything else. He found her on a Thursday afternoon in February. She was coming out of the publication offices, coat buttoned against the cold, a stack of letters under her arm, mentally composing the response to the education piece she needed to have drafted before 5 o'clock. Edmund Ashworth was standing on the pavement outside. He looked like a man who had walked through fire. Not unscathed, not unmarked, but standing, upright, clear-eyed, present on the other side of it. His face was thinner, there were shadows under his eyes that had not been there in November, but his gaze was the same, dark, direct, doing the thing it always did, looking at her as though she were a person. "How did you find me?" she asked. He said, "Thomas Reeve. He sends your regards. He has taken a position in a legal firm in Gray's Inn. He seems, against considerable odds, to be thriving." Maren's chest tightened in a way she was going to have to examine later when she was alone. "Good," she said. "I owe you an apology," Edmund said. She tilted her head. "For what specifically?" "For Mrs. Finch acting without my knowledge, for not," his jaw tightened, "for being slower than I should have been, in several respects, some of them significant." "You were occupied," Maren said, "with publicly dismantling your family's legacy of concealment. I understand this takes some time."
His mouth did the almost smile, the one she had catalogued without meaning to, the one that lived in the territory adjacent to joy. "You are not going to make this easy," he said. "I am not in the business of making things easy," she replied. "I would have thought you'd established that by now." He took a step toward her. The February street moved around them, people and carriages, and the gray particular noise of London in winter, and none of it stopped, none of it noticed, the world indifferent as it always was to the moments that mattered. "Maren," he said, her name again, just that. "I want to say something to you, and I would like you, just this once, not to immediately find a reason to argue with it." She waited. "You are the most honest person I have ever encountered," he said. "You are the most infuriating, the most precise, and the most—" Something crossed his face. Something she recognized now, had been recognizing since November, had simply not allowed herself to call it by its name. "The only person whose opinion I have ever wanted without reservation, without the instinct to manage it or discount it or protect myself from it." The street was cold. She could feel it through her coat. "I sat on a cold floor and told you the truth about my family when I had told no one else. Not because you asked, because you were there, and it seemed, for the first time in years, like the truth might actually matter to someone, like I might matter to someone. Not the title, not the name, me." Maren's throat was doing something that required a significant effort to manage. "I know what this looks like," she said, carefully. "I know what the world will say." "The world," Edmund said, "has said a great deal about me in recent months. I have found I can survive it." "It's different when it's—" "I know what it is," he said. "I know what you are and what I am and what the distance between those things looks like to everyone who is watching. I know what my mother will say. I know what the clubs will say. I know what the newspapers will write." He paused.
I also know that I went to the East Wing every morning for 3 weeks because you were there. I know that you walked out of my house with a carpet bag, without a reference, with more dignity than anyone I have ever met in a ballroom or a drawing room or anywhere else that dignity is supposed to live. And I know," his voice dropped just slightly, "that I have spent 2 months being unable to think of much else." The silence that followed was the loudest thing on the street. "What are you asking?" Maren said. "I'm not asking anything. I'm telling you that I'm entirely and irrevocably in earnest, and that I would very much like to know whether you will allow me to call on you, properly, as a person who wishes to be considered worthy of your company, which I am aware is a considerable undertaking." Maren looked at him. She looked at him for a long moment on a February pavement in London, and she thought about all the reasons it was impossible. They were real reasons. The world was real. Its cruelties were real. The machinery of class and expectation and social rule was real and grinding, and had swallowed kinder people than either of them without pausing for breath. She also thought about a man sitting in the dust with his back against a bare wall, telling her the truth when he had nothing to gain from telling it and everything to lose. She thought, he did it, not for me, for the right reasons, for 3 men who were called the incident and 400 workers and a boy with ink-stained fingers. But he did it. She shifted the letters under her arm. "You may call on me," she said, "Tuesday evenings between 5 and 7. I work until 5 and I will not be hurrying." She fixed him with a look that she had learned from no one, that was entirely her own. "I reserve the right to argue you out of it at any point and without warning." Edmund Ashworth's face changed. Not dramatically, not in the way faces changed in novels, all at once and completely. It changed the way a room changes when someone opens a window that has been shut too long. Not all at once, but enough. Something opening, something that had been held very carefully in the dark, finally permitted a small, uncertain portion of the light. "Tuesday," he said. "Tuesday," she confirmed. "Don't be late. I have an article to finish." She walked away. 3 steps, 4, the street noise closing around her. She was composing the response to the Education Act piece in her head already, filing Edmund Ashworth in the place she kept things that were not yet resolved, that required more time and more thought and more... "She's remarkable," he heard him say, quietly to the February air behind her. She kept walking, but she allowed herself, for exactly 2 steps and not one more, to smile.
London talked, of course. London always talked. The Duke of Ashmore, already notorious for his extraordinary public confession, became doubly scandalous the following spring when it emerged, through the particular channels by which these things always emerged, that he was calling on a woman who had until recently been employed as his housemaid. The clubs were apoplectic. His mother wept into her correspondence with such frequency that her stationery supplier reported a significant increase in orders. A columnist in one of the less generous papers ran a piece titled "The Duke and the Dustpan," which Maren read aloud to Edmund over tea in the Bloomsbury sitting-room that was hers now, that she had chosen, furnished, and made her own on a salary that was not large, but was earned, with the dry, precise delivery of a woman who found human absurdity genuinely and deeply funny. "You're not offended?" Edmund asked, watching her. "Endlessly," she said, "but I've found that being offended and being deterred are entirely different things, and I see no reason to confuse them." He looked at her across the tea-table with the expression she had stopped trying to catalogue and simply allowed herself to know. He had learned by then that the things she needed him to say he could simply show her, by being present, by being consistent, by choosing her company in rooms where choosing her company cost him something real. And the things she did not need him to say were best left in the silence, where they kept better anyway. In May, his mother organized a reception, a last, stately, elaborately catered attempt to place Edmund in a room with suitable alternatives and trust that proximity would do what letters had failed to accomplish. Edmund attended. He crossed the full length of the room, past the whispering matrons, the watchful fathers, the lovely daughters who had been presented for his consideration in their best silk and their most practiced smiles, and sat down beside Maren Ellis in the corner chair, where she had been in focused and apparently entirely absorbing conversation with a parliamentarian's wife about the proposed amendments to the Factories Act. He sat down. He stayed. He did not make a speech. He did not announce a thing. He simply sat beside her, in full view of the room, and the matrons, and the fathers, and the daughters, and the particular merciless attention of London society, and the room understood, as London always understood eventually, what it was looking at. He means it. Maren did not look up from her conversation for 3 full minutes. When she did, she glanced at him. He raised an eyebrow. She turned back to the parliamentarian's wife. "As I was saying," she continued with perfect composure, "the amendment requires 3 signatures, and I believe we can obtain them before the summer recess if we approach the right people in the right order." London watched. London seethed. London, as it always did when the alternative was being left behind, eventually adjusted. Loveliest listener of the Tarn. If there is something to learn from her, it is this. The rooms that were never meant for you are often the ones you were born to change, and the person who sees you clearly, who looks when the world has trained itself not to, who says your name as though it matters, who sits beside you in full view of everyone who would prefer them elsewhere, that person is worth more than any title, any distance, any rule that was made before either of you arrived. Her name was Maren Ellis. She scrubbed floors and read philosophy, and told the truth in rooms that punished it. She never stopped.